I have never told this story out loud before. Not because I forgot it, but because even now I cannot fully make sense of what happened to me. Some memories fade with time. This one never has. In 2023, I was working in hospitality because the flexible hours worked perfectly with my school schedule. That was how I ended up in New Orleans, working at a small hostel just outside the French Quarter. The building was an old Victorian house, the kind that seemed to breathe with age. The ceilings were high, the hallways narrow, and every step across the wooden floors produced a soft creak that echoed longer than it should have. During the day, it felt charming and historic. At night, it felt different, heavier, as if the house never fully slept. Everyone joked about its quirks. Room 3 was always cold, no matter how much we adjusted the air conditioning. Guests regularly reported footsteps overhead when the upper floor was empty. Late at night, the electronic lock on the front door would suddenly begin whirring on its own, the mechanical sound cutting through the silence like something trying to wake the house. I never believed in anything paranormal. Old buildings make noises. That was enough explanation for me. There was also an object that had always been there. An antique hand mirror rested on a shelf in the dining room. No one knew where it came from. Every staff member said the same thing. It had simply always been there, long before any of us arrived. The mirror was beautiful in an unsettling way. Its silver frame was darkened with age, carved with delicate patterns that curled like vines. The glass itself was slightly clouded, softening reflections just enough that faces looked unfamiliar if you stared too long. One coworker, who I will call Maya, refused to look into it. She said it made her uneasy, though she could never explain why. I laughed it off. A few weeks into my stay, we began deep cleaning the closed upper floor. While dusting a tall bookshelf, my hand brushed something hidden above it. A heavy object slipped free and fell into a box beside me with a dull thud. It was the mirror, covered with dust and cobwebs as if it had been deliberately tucked away. I cleaned it carefully in the sink, watching the tarnish fade beneath running water, and returned it downstairs to the dining room where it belonged. That was when things began to change. I started waking each morning with a deep, unexplainable dread. Not fear exactly, just the quiet certainty that something was wrong. The feeling lingered in my chest for several minutes before fading, leaving behind exhaustion I could not explain. Then, the mirror began to move. At first, I assumed guests were responsible. People returned late from Bourbon Street all the time, laughing, disoriented, sometimes careless. I would find the mirror turned toward the wall, moved to another table, or placed somewhere strange like beneath a chair. Each time, I returned it to its place. But slowly, I noticed something worse. The tarnish I had cleaned away began creeping back across the frame, spreading like dark veins along the metal. One night, after finishing my shift, I entered the dining room and froze. Someone stood there in the darkness, facing the mirror. Long, dark hair falling down their back. I assumed it was Maya. The next morning, I confronted her, asking her to stop moving it. She looked genuinely confused. She swore she had not touched it. While holding the mirror, I felt a sudden surge of anger rise inside me, sharp and overwhelming, completely out of proportion to the moment. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving me shaken and embarrassed. Not long after that, Maya left the job and returned home. But the mirror kept moving. Eventually, I placed it inside room 4, an empty guest room, just so I would not have to see it every day. A few nights later, while working reception, a guest came downstairs sometime after 1 in the morning. Her face looked pale, her eyes unfocused with exhaustion. She asked if I could check on someone crying in the room across from hers. She said the sound had gone on for hours. The room she pointed to was room 4. I told her the room was empty, but she insisted. The crying had sounded close, human. To reassure her, I unlocked the door and turned on the light. The room was silent, but the lampshade was shattered. The lampshade hung torn open, and small shards of glass glittered across the pillow. On the floor lay the mirror. It looked as though it had been thrown violently across the room. And in that moment, I remembered Maya had already left town days earlier. It had never been her. The guest checked out early the next morning, without explanation. She looked like someone who had not slept at all. I brought the mirror downstairs, but accidentally carried it into my own room later that day. That night, I woke suddenly. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard movement. Slow footsteps crossing my room. The faint sound of fabric brushing against furniture. Then the mattress sank beside me. The weight was unmistakable. Someone had sat down. I did not move. I barely breathed. My heart pounded so violently I felt it shaking through the bed. I could sense something beside me without seeing it, and deep down, I knew it was not human. It stayed there for a long time. Then the pressure lifted. No footsteps followed, no door opened. Only silence remained. After that night, sleep became impossible. I kept the lights on and constantly felt watched, as if someone stood just behind me wherever I went. A few days later, a set of master keys went missing during shift change. I became irrationally angry, desperate to prove I had not taken them. We checked the security cameras together. The footage showed me finishing my shift, hanging the keys, turning off the lights, and leaving. Then the timestamp changed. 3 a.m. The front door opened, and I walked back inside. I watched myself calmly remove the keys and disappear down the hallway. I have no memory of doing it. I had never sleptwalked before in my life. I resigned that same day and left New Orleans soon after. Nothing strange has happened to me since. I sleep normally now. Life feels ordinary again. But sometimes, in the quiet moments just before sleep, I remember the feeling of the mattress sinking beside me. And I cannot stop wondering whether the mirror was ever meant to reflect me at all, or if something had been watching from the other side the entire time.
I almost left New Orleans 3 days early. Not because of the weather, not because I got sick, and not because of anything that happened outside the hotel. It was because by the 4th morning, I had become terrified of looking into the bathroom mirror, and I wasn't the only one. The strange thing is, when we first arrived, nothing looked wrong. The hotel was beautiful. Old wrought-iron balconies hung over the street. Gas lanterns flickered against weathered brick walls. The courtyard was full of jasmine and fountains, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a movie. My boyfriend and I had specifically requested a balcony room overlooking one of the quieter streets of the French Quarter. We got exactly what we wanted. Room 428. The moment I stepped inside, though, I felt something. Not fear, not exactly, just resistance. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instantly want to leave? No reason, no explanation, Your body just decides before your brain does. The bedroom felt normal enough, but the bathroom bothered me. I couldn't stop glancing at it. The mirror stretched almost the entire length of the sink, framed by old dark wood. The lighting was dim and yellow, making everything look slightly older than it really was. I remember staring at the doorway and thinking, I don't like that room. I didn't tell my boyfriend. He wasn't the type. If a ghost walked through the room carrying a chainsaw, he'd probably ask it for proof of identification. So I kept it to myself. The first night passed without incident. The second day didn't. That's when the fighting started. And when I say fighting, I don't mean arguing. I mean screaming. The kind of fights that leave your throat raw. The kind that make you say things you instantly regret. Things escalated so fast it honestly felt unnatural. We'd be laughing over breakfast, holding hands while exploring the quarter, kissing, joking, then we'd walk back into that room. And within 30 minutes we'd be at each other's throats. Over nothing, literally nothing. A misplaced phone charger, a forgotten reservation, a misunderstood comment. Every disagreement exploded into a war. The strangest part? The second we left the room, everything settled down, like a switch had been flipped. One afternoon, we nearly broke up over dinner plans. We stormed out separately. An hour later, we accidentally crossed paths near Jackson Square and somehow ended up laughing together over beignets. Neither of us could explain why we'd been so angry. It made no sense. The pattern continued. Outside the room, normal. Inside the room, chaos. By the fourth night, things became physical. Not life-threatening, but ugly. Shoving, doors slamming, crying. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed texting my best friend. I was looking up flights home. That's how bad it had gotten. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I left. I wandered the French Quarter alone after midnight. The streets were mostly empty. Music drifted from distant bars. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. I walked for nearly 3 hours. By the time I returned, my boyfriend was gone. I didn't care. I was exhausted. I collapsed into bed fully clothed and immediately fell asleep. That night, I had nightmares. Not ordinary nightmares. They felt different. Too real. In one dream, I was standing in the hotel bathroom. The mirror was covered in condensation. Something was moving behind me. Not approaching. Waiting. Watching. I kept trying to turn around, but my body wouldn't move. Then I heard someone whisper, "Look closer." I woke up gasping. The room was dark. My boyfriend had returned sometime during the night and was asleep beside me. I checked my phone. 5:47 a.m. The sun hadn't risen yet. I decided to take a bath before heading downstairs for coffee. I didn't want to think. I just wanted the trip to be over. I started filling the tub. Then I leaned over the sink. My elbows rested on the counter while I stared down at the drain. I felt hungover, exhausted, emotionally drained. At some point, I raised my head and looked into the mirror. At first, I thought my eyes were adjusting. Then I thought maybe the lighting was strange. Then I realized something was very wrong. My eyes were moving, not blinking, moving. The irises themselves, they were shifting, rotating. The colours inside them were swirling like oil in water. Dark brown became black. Black became gold. gold twisted into shapes that shouldn't have existed. I froze. I leaned closer. The closer I got, the worse it became. The pupils weren't round anymore. They stretched, contracted, almost breathing. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still there. I remember grabbing the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. Then something happened that still makes my stomach turn. The reflection blinked, a fraction of a second late. Not much, maybe half a second, but enough. Enough to know. Enough to make every hair on my body stand up. I stumbled backwards so hard I slammed into the bathroom door. The sound echoed through the room. My boyfriend woke up instantly. What happened? I couldn't answer. I couldn't even explain what I'd seen. I jumped into the bathtub and refused to look at the mirror again. Not once. Not for the rest of the morning. We checked out a few hours later. I finally told him what happened while loading our luggage into the car. To my surprise, he didn't laugh. Instead, he got quiet. Really quiet. Then he said something I hadn't expected. The first morning while I was out getting coffee, he'd been lying in bed half asleep, and he was certain he'd seen someone standing behind the curtains. Not outside. Inside. In the room. Watching him. He never told me because he thought it sounded ridiculous. We spent the drive to our next destination trying to rationalize everything. Stress, alcohol, lack of sleep, relationship problems, anything but what we were both thinking. By that evening, we'd arrived at an old plantation house outside the city. The place was famous for ghost stories, which was ironic, because I'd spent years chasing haunted locations, old hospitals, abandoned asylums, historic mansions. I'd never experienced anything convincing. Until that hotel room. We settled onto the veranda with dinner and drinks. A few other guests were staying there. 2 older couples who came every year. After a while, one of the women asked where we'd stayed in New Orleans. I told her. Her face lit up. "Oh, we love that place." Then she asked, "What room?" I told her. The smile disappeared. Not entirely, just enough, like she'd remembered something unpleasant. "Was it the corner room with the balcony?" My stomach dropped. "Yeah." The woman exchanged a glance with her husband. Then she laughed nervously. "Funny." "What?" "We always reserve that room." A chill crawled up my arms. She stared at me for several seconds, then asked, "Did anything strange happen?" I didn't answer. I think she saw the look on my face because her own expression changed immediately. The husband sat up straighter. The second couple stopped talking. Suddenly, nobody seemed interested in their drinks anymore. Finally, I told them. The fighting, the nightmares, the mirror, the delayed blink. Everything. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. When I finished, the woman looked pale. Then she whispered, "Did the mirror show your eyes changing?" Every sound around us seemed to disappear. Even the crickets. I stared at her. She stared back. Then she slowly nodded. "My sister stayed in that room." The husband reached for her hand, like he'd heard this story before. Many times. The woman continued. "She saw the same thing." My chest tightened. I felt sick. "Exactly the same thing?" She nodded. Then she said something that made the blood drain from my face. "No." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. At first it was the same. She looked toward the darkness beyond the veranda, then back at me. But when she leaned closer, the woman swallowed. She said the eyes in the mirror weren't hers anymore. Nobody spoke. The night suddenly felt much colder. I waited for her to continue. Finally, I asked what happened after that. The woman hesitated. Then she answered, "My sister refused to talk about it for years." What did she see? The woman looked directly at me. And for a moment, I genuinely wished I hadn't asked, because the fear in her face was real. Not ghost story real. Not campfire story real. Actual fear. Then she said, she claimed that when she stepped away from the mirror, the reflection didn't.
The first time I saw my neighbor, she was standing completely still in her front yard at 2 o'clock in the morning, not walking, not smoking, not looking for something, just standing there, facing my bedroom window. And when I looked outside again the next morning, there were muddy footprints beneath my window, only they didn't lead away. They stopped there, like whoever made them had simply vanished. I was 16 when my family moved to a small town in Louisiana, not too far from New Orleans. It was the kind of place people describe as charming when they don't have to live there. Old houses, giant oak trees, Spanish moss hanging over the roads like curtains. A main street with one grocery store, one pharmacy, one diner, and way too many people who stared at you because they knew you weren't from there. The town was called Black Cypress. That wasn't the official name. The official name was something boring, printed on road signs and government documents. But everyone called it Black Cypress. When I asked why, people gave me the same answer. That's just what it's always been called, which, looking back, should have been my first warning. My parents loved the house immediately. It sat on half an acre with a wraparound porch, an old magnolia tree out front, and a backyard that disappeared into thick woods. My mom kept calling it peaceful. My dad kept talking about property value. I just kept looking at the house next door, because that house didn't match the rest of the neighborhood. Every other property had open yards, flower beds, porch swings, little white fences, but the house next door was surrounded by cement walls, tall ones, at least 8 feet high. The only opening was this enormous black wrought iron gate with twisted designs worked into the metal. At night, red lights shone up through the bars. I know how dramatic this sounds, but I swear, when those lights came on, it looked like the gates to hell. Behind the walls was a house that looked abandoned, half-finished, dark. No curtains, no porch furniture, nothing. But behind the house stood a shed, except calling it a shed feels stupid because it was 2 stories tall, bigger than some apartments, and every single night one dim red light glowed from the second-floor window. The day we closed on the house, contractors came by to look at the repairs. That's when we met her, our neighbor. She appeared at the gate like she'd been waiting for us. Tall, thin, older, but in a way that was hard to place. At first, I thought she was maybe in her late 60s. Then I looked closer and wasn't sure. Her skin was pale, not sickly, just untouched by sun. She wore dark sunglasses even though the sky was cloudy, and her hair was pulled back so tightly it made her face look almost sculpted. She introduced herself as Miss Delacroix. She said she owned the house next door but mostly lived in New Orleans. Then she said something strange. "I stay in the little house when I'm here." She pointed toward the 2-story shed. "My main house is unfinished." My dad nodded like that was normal. My mom smiled politely. One of the contractors looked at the ground. I noticed that. When my dad joked about the cement walls and said something like, "You must really like your privacy," Miss Delacroix smiled. Not offended, not amused, just smiling. Then she said, "Privacy keeps a person alive." Nobody laughed after that. She disappeared behind the gate, and that was the last time we saw her for months. But the red light stayed on, every night. I asked around about her. At first, just casually. The woman at the diner said, "Oh, honey, don't worry about her." The cashier at the grocery store said, "She doesn't bother nobody." An old man at the gas station said, "Best not to bother her either." That was the thing about Black Cypress. People didn't act like they didn't know. They acted like they knew too much and didn't want to be the one to tell me. The first weird night happened maybe 3 weeks after we moved in. I woke up at 1:17 in the morning because headlights flashed across my ceiling. A black SUV turned into Miss Delacroix's gate, then another car came, then another, all expensive, all quiet. Nobody honked, nobody talked outside, and the gate opened before each car arrived, like someone inside already knew they were coming. I watched from behind my curtain. People got out dressed like they were going to a funeral or a private party. Long coats, dark dresses, no bright colors. No one looked at their phones. No one looked around. They all went through the gate, and then it closed behind them. About an hour later, music started. Soft classical music, violins, piano, old, elegant, creepy music, then laughter, low voices, glasses clinking. It sounded like a party, except there was something wrong with it. The laughter came in bursts, too sudden, too controlled, like everyone was waiting for permission to laugh. After that night, the cars came regularly, never before midnight, never after sunrise. Sometimes one car, sometimes 6. I started keeping track in a notebook, dates, times, types of cars, how long they stayed. I told myself I was just bored, but really I was obsessed. There was a man in a silver Jaguar who came 3 Fridays in a row, then never again. A woman in a white Lexus came every Wednesday for a month, then stopped. One night, a red antique car pulled in, the kind you only see in old movies, and a man stepped out wearing gloves. White gloves. In Louisiana heat. I wrote that down too. The more I watched, the less it made sense. And then came the night I heard crying. It was after 1 in the morning. There were 4 cars inside the gate. The red light in the shed was brighter than usual. I could hear the music again. Then I heard a woman sobbing. Not screaming, not loud, just soft, broken crying. I don't know what got into me. I put on shoes, slipped out the back door, crossed the street, and hid behind the oak tree near Miss Delacroix's wall. The air felt different there, heavy, hot, like standing too close to a stove. The crying stopped. Instantly. Then everything went silent. No music, no voices, no frogs, no crickets, nothing. I should have gone home. Instead, I moved closer to the gate and tried to look through the iron bars. That's when I felt it. A sharp pinch on the side of my neck, like a sting. I slapped at it and stumbled backward. The gate stretched in front of me. The red lights blurred. My legs went numb. I remember trying to scream, but my mouth wouldn't work. The last thing I saw was a pair of pale hands wrapping around the bars from the inside. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I didn't know where I was. My vision was fuzzy. My mouth tasted like metal. I was lying on cold concrete in a room so small I hit the wall when I tried to sit up. There were no windows, no furniture, just damp walls, a low ceiling, and one yellow light swinging above me. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out. I crawled instead. My hands scraped against the floor. There was a door a few feet away. I could see light under it. I reached for it. Then the door opened. At first, all I saw were shoes, black heels, slowly walking toward me. Click, click, click. I tried to look up, but my vision blurred again. A woman's voice said very softly, "Curiosity is such a dangerous thing." Then I blacked out. I woke up in my own bed. Sunlight was coming through my window. For a second, I thought it had been a nightmare. Then I touched my neck. It hurt. I ran to the bathroom mirror. Just below my jaw were 2 tiny marks. Not big, not dramatic, but there. 2 red dots. When I checked my notebook, the pages from that night were gone. Not ripped out. Gone. Like they had never existed. At the bottom of the next page, in handwriting that wasn't mine, someone had written, "You should stop watching." I didn't. That's the stupid part. I should have, but I didn't. A week later, I went to the town library and searched old newspapers. Most of it was useless. Church announcements, flood reports, obituaries. Then I found an article from 1948. A family had lived in our house back then. The article said they left suddenly after their youngest daughter went missing. No body was ever found. The last person to see her claimed she was walking toward the property next door. The property with the walls. I stared at that article until the words blurred. When I asked the librarian about Miss Delacroix, she went pale. Then she said, "Some families in this town know better than to ask about old things." That night, I woke up at 3:13. I don't know why. I just opened my eyes. The room was silent. Too silent. I looked toward the window. The red light in the shed was off. For the first time since we'd moved in, I went cold. Slowly, I pulled back the curtain. Miss Delacroix was standing under the oak tree in our yard, looking up at me, smiling. Beside her were 3 other people, perfectly still. None of them moved. None of them blinked. They just watched. The next morning, I found muddy footprints under my window. 4 sets, and tucked beneath the oak tree was a yellowed photograph. It was black and white, very old. It showed my house, not her house. Mine. A family stood on the porch. The women wore dresses. The men wore suits. Everyone looked serious. I flipped it over. Written on the back was October 17th, 1948. My hands started shaking, because standing in the background beneath the oak tree was Miss Delacroix. Same face, same posture, same smile. Not younger, not older. Exactly the same. I shoved the photograph in my desk drawer and tried not to think about it. But that night, I barely slept. Around 3 in the morning, I woke again. The house was silent. The red light was glowing across the street, and the photograph was sitting on my desk. I know I put it in the drawer. I know I did. But there it was, face up. I picked it up and immediately realized something was different. I counted the people on the porch. Once, twice, then a 3rd time. The first time I looked, there had been 7. Now there were 8. Standing at the far left edge of the photograph was a teenage girl, half hidden behind a porch column. She wore jeans, a dark hoodie, long hair. At first, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. Then I noticed the necklace, a small silver crescent moon. The exact necklace my grandmother gave me for my 16th birthday. The exact necklace I was wearing right now. I looked closer, and the girl wasn't just wearing my necklace, she had my face, my eyes, my hair. She was me, standing in a photograph from 1948, and she was smiling. Not my smile, hers, Miss Delacroix's smile. I dropped the photograph, then I saw fresh writing on the back. I swear it hadn't been there before. The ink looked wet. With shaking hands, I turned it over. There were 6 words. 6 words I still think about every night. Don't worry. You'll be joining us soon. I ran to the window. Across the street, the red light glowed from the 2nd floor of the shed, and standing behind the glass, barely visible in the crimson light, was Miss Delacroix, smiling at me, like she already knew something I didn't.